Good evening, y'all. Welcome to the baking side of my channel. Tonight we are going to be making lemon bars. For those of you who have never had those before, it is pretty simple. It's a butter crust. Bake that first, and then you make a lemon custard type thing that goes on top. You bake that again, put it in the fridge, and you eat them the next day. That's preferred. Before we dive into it, I just want to share a little bit as far as the creative process and how I get to where I am right now in regards to coming up with the ideas, what I want to make based off of what time of year it is. If I am feeling inspired to bake something, I don't always know what I want. I'll kind of wait for something, whether it be an event, a party, if I'm just going somewhere and I want to bring something, right? It could be a doctor's appointment, whatever. So for me, I've been baking in some way, shape, or form for about 20 years. Growing up with a lot of siblings, baking and cooking was a big part of life. And I really am thankful for that because as an adult now, being able to go into a grocery store and have an idea and then bring it to fruition in your kitchen is honestly a really fun experience as a whole. And it can be either shared with other people, by yourself. It's very relaxing. For me, it is at least. There's different components that I enjoy for baking, different components for cooking. And once you get to a certain point baking, I think a lot of people's conception around how not flexible baking is, right? Because you have certain measurements, you have to all, make sure it's all right. And there's some truth to that to a certain degree. However, again, once you get to a certain level, you can kind of play around with it a little bit. So there's sometimes I'll measure, sometimes I won't, and you'll see that in this video. And that leaves room for you to be creative. Now, if you're making a recipe for the first time, I will say it is important, I think, to do what it says. So then you have a benchmark of like, this is the baseline of this recipe. Then I can tweak it from there. But if you tweak it or you improvise off the bat, if it's a new recipe for you, and either you mess it up, you don't know what you did to mess it up, or if you made it even better, you don't know what you did, right? So in this recipe, I have a little more lemons than it calls for. I probably won't measure the salt. Salt is a big part that I'll get into later. So the last week and a half, these lemon bars I brought to some friends a couple months ago, and they loved them. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people, some of this is normal to me because I grew up doing this, and I started making some of this for some of my friends over the last year, and I realized like not everyone got to have what I did experience-wise when it comes to food. And so it's been fun to share this with other people, share this with friends. And citrus is a very like springtime, summertime thing, right? And so we just entered spring last week. So I made these a week ago and have some leftover lemons, want to make them again for some other people this weekend. And so when I get that idea, or when it lines up when people are wanting them and when it lines up with my schedule and my level of energy, I'll then start to roughly plan a time to do this. And the reason why I kind of plan it, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but internally I'm planning it. One of the things that my mom would tell us growing up is when you're baking or cooking, the most important ingredient is love. And that sounds a little cliche. However, I've added some other adjectives to that over the years as I bake, but there's a level of intention and energy you put into homemade things that does matter. 350, by the way, is what we bake these at. It does matter if you're doing it with pure intention, and you can feel that when you eat it. Your body receives that energy. And so I rarely, unless I really have to, will I bake if I am not in a headspace and if my body is not in a way where this is fun for me, this is relaxing for me, because that will come through. And so I might get the idea and be like, well, I have no energy this week. I actually can't bake until Friday or Saturday or whatever it is. And then when it lines up with my energy levels, the right ingredients to have in my house, and then I can bring it somewhere, that's when I get to bake. So that's this. This was requested by some friends of mine, and this works with my schedule. That's something I've learned over the years as well, where if I would force this out of obligation or out of desire to please other people, that's a big part of it as well. I'm not saying you can't do that at times, but for where I'm at in my baking and creation journey, it's really important to make sure that those line up for me. Forgot the butter, 1 second. So most baking is just different versions of like flour, butter, sugar, some eggs, maybe some baking powder, salt, and then maybe some fruit or chocolate or something like that. So again, when you kind of get into the baking flow of things, it's pretty simple. And you always want to start with, at least for me, I'll start with butter, sugar, any kind of flavoring. So whether that be vanilla extract, you'll also add any other liquid, so eggs, milk. When it comes to this, since we're making a more of a pastry style crust, I would say, you use cold butter, which is very important because the temperature or the consistency that the butter is actually matters a lot with how that will be cooked. And so it'll be 1 full cup of butter, and then I'm going to do my best to not do it too quickly because I realize, again, for some of y'all, this might be your first time in the baking world, and I've done this, again, for a long time. So the crust is, and I'm doing this one gluten-free as well. King Arthur, great flour for gluten-free people. That's another big component that I've realized. I'm not gluten-free. A lot of my friends are. Some things you'll feel the difference on gluten-free flour. Sometimes you won't. With this, you really won't because of the amount of butter that's in it, to be honest. And then how much liquid is on top of this when it comes to the lemon juice, the lemons, the eggs. You're not really going to get that granular taste that you might get in like a cake, or if you use like almond flour or whatever. So 2 cups of flour. People, you can sift flour. I rarely do. It's mainly a time thing for me. Like, it just feels tedious. The only time that I will do that is if I'm making like a cake, a coffee cake, an actual cake, something where you want that fluffier feel. But with this, and you'll see in a minute, this is gonna be packed down into the bottom of the pan. Sugar, sometimes I will substitute maple syrup or honey, depending on what I'm making. When it comes to like shortbread style desserts, which this is that, I'll use regular sugar. So 1/2 cup of sugar. Again, you can sift sugar as well. I'm not a huge fan of that. It feels redundant, but to each their own. And then salt. We're at the salt part now. This is one of my favorite components of baking because it adds a level of polarity to any sweet. And there's a big coarse salt that I get from the grocery store where when it is cooked, it doesn't dissolve. And so you get pieces of sweet or whatever the base flavor is of your dessert, and then you get little crunches of salt, which is, in my opinion, a fun little surprise. And this calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. This is one thing that I'll go off of vibes almost every time. I will rarely measure the salt unless I'm doing something for the first time, because too much salt, I don't think I've ever done too much salt, to be honest, because it's just rare. And again, I kind of can gauge based off what I'm making how much I actually want to put in there. Another thing that I like to do while I'm baking, if I'm able to, is somewhat clean up as I go. So we'll see how it actually pans out tonight. This will probably all be cleaned up by the time those are done in about 40 minutes, give or take a little bit. And that's nice because you're not wasting time like doing it all at the end. So 1 full cup, which is 2 sticks of butter, or 16 tablespoons, whatever measurement you want to use. Ingredients wise for the butter, Kerrygold butter I have found to be the best. I tried Truly butter once. It's another grass-fed butter, and it was interesting. It was too oily. It messed up the things that I made, and I tried a couple different recipes a couple months ago with it. So Kerrygold is the one that I found to be the most effective. So flour, sugar, a little bit of salt, cup of butter. Use a pastry cutter. You can use a fork. This is just a lot more effective. And what you want to do is just basically chop the butter, and you're by default mixing in the flour and sugar at the same time. And you're going to want to do this until you have about pea-size pieces of butter. So you don't want to mix it fully. This is why you don't melt the butter or you don't use soft butter. You want it to kind of be chunky. This part can be a little bit strenuous at times, but part of the fun. Using a little, like a butter knife like this can be very helpful to clean out the tool. And depending on what kind of bowl you have, you kind of push it up against the side of the bowl to push it through the curves of the pastry cutter. And then every once in a while, as you're mixing, kind of do this. It brings the bigger pieces to the surface, which is very helpful. Another component, as you can see, I have all this stuff on a towel. Two reasons why I do that. One, that bothers the fuck out of me, the noise. And it keeps everything clean, where usually when I'm done, I can just fold this up, rinse it in the sink, wash it, and the counter's clean. So there's little things like that that I've done over the years that help with the efficiency of baking as a whole. Because when it comes to any experience, at least for me, I look at the before aspect of it, so the prep involved, which I already touched on, the actual act that you're going to do, whatever that may be, and then after the fact. So when you're doing it, in this case, how present are you? What energy are you putting into it, like we talked about? And then are you setting yourself up for when you finish, it's not a strenuous process. Some people hate cleaning up after baking, which I get, I can understand. One of the rules we had growing up was if you baked and you had someone lick the bowl, if it's lickable, then they had to wash it. So there'd always be this thing where it'd be like, who wants to lick the bowl? And then you could get out of washing the dishes. So that's about what you want. So that's maybe a little bit bigger, but that's kind of the gist of it. Might mix this a little bit just to make sure there's nothing on the bottom, right? So kind of crumbly, but it's once you put it in a bowl or a pan. So buttered a 9x13. The buttering aspect is important because once we add the lemon mixture on top of the crust, the sides of it, if it's not buttered, it will kind of stick and burn to it. And it just makes it easier. I really don't butter a dish. Like there's almost no reason why you shouldn't, for a lot of reasons. So dump it in like so. We'll use this bowl again in a second for the lemon side of things. And then you just use your hands to gently even it out the best you can. And then once you maybe break up a couple of bigger pieces, once you feel it somewhat level, you just gently press it down. You're not wanting to flatten it like as hard as you can. You're just trying to compact it so it sets. So when it starts to bake, it's not just a crumbling mess. It's hard to show on camera, but there's still some flour, like some a good flour component to it, obviously. And so if you didn't press it down, the butter wouldn't be able to mesh with the sugar and the other ingredients in there. And then as you're doing it, you kind of feel for how level it is as well, right? This is where you want to be attentive to your hand, how it feels. You're not pressing it down too far. And you don't want to have the sides go up too far either. So make sure that looks like that. And that's the finished product. So this, wash my hands real quick. This will go in the oven. It says for 20 minutes. Now this is a big part of baking that you do need some judgment on. When a recipe calls for a certain amount of time in the oven, that's not always accurate. It could be the kind of oven you have. I have a gas oven. If you have a convection oven, there's different kinds that you can cook with, right? Also depends on the ingredients you use. So like I said, the truly butter cooked very differently. So what I usually do, I've made this before, so I know it's about 20 minutes. I'll put it in for 20 minutes and then I'll look at it. I'll take it out. And you want to cook it until the very edges just start to brown, like just the teensiest bit, because that tells you it's cooked enough. So when you put the lemon mixture in, you are not going to, they won't blend in together. So this will go in for about 20 minutes. Cool. All right, on to the next part. The filling is cup and a half of sugar, quarter cup of flour, 4 eggs, the juice and the zest of 4 lemons, and then that's it. So honestly, really, really simple. And I put those ingredients away already. So here we are, sugar and flour again. Sugar, 1.5 cups. One of my most recent things I've enjoyed using is a 3/4 cup measure for half a cups. I don't know why, it just feels easier to use the same thing twice instead of like a cup measure and a half cup measure. There's just things like that as you bake, you kind of find little, and things that are easier for you that you find more enjoyable to use. That is one of them for me as of late. And then flour. So I made these last week, like I said, and I made a half a batch of orange ones just to test it. And when I was doing the flour for the middle part, I didn't even really measure the flour. I just kind of like eyeballed a half of a quarter cup, which like I think it technically is a different measurement, like tablespoons or something. So that's where you kind of have some leniency of, what you actually need to be doing. Okay, I'm gonna move this aside for a moment. Now we need. Actually, no, I'm gonna put it right in there. So I already washed these. You want to do the zest first, obviously, because it'd be pretty difficult to zest them if you've already juiced them. This is where it calls for 4 medium-sized lemons. I honestly just kind of go, I'll use roughly that amount, but medium size is super subjective, and I've never found it to be like too lemony. So I have like 4 smaller ones and then a bit of a bigger one here. So again, you just kind of go off what feels, who am I trying to quote? It'll come to me. There's a quote that tried to, I thought of for a second. I think technically you could probably eat these a couple hours after they're made. They are best cold though, in my opinion. some of the things I made these I think last summer for the first time and brought it again to some friends, and that was one of the first times where I really saw like, oh wow, people haven't experienced some of these baked goods before. And just people's reactions. At first I was like, are they overreacting? Are they just being dramatic for the sake of it? And then I thought about it for a minute. I'm like, wait a minute. If you didn't grow up with parents, grandparents, friends, a lot of my friends growing up had a lot of siblings as well. And so everyone was baking and cooking. That was just part of the culture that I grew up in. And realizing that if that isn't the case, if you didn't have that experience, then like where are you going to get something like this from? And it was just normal for all of my friends to be a chef or a baker or both out of necessity. And then I think as you get older, you can still do that for yourself. So that's been probably one of my favorite parts about doing this as I've gotten older, aside from just the process itself, which I already explained. is the sharing it with other people and changing people's opinions about certain things. Like one of my friends, she hates lemons. She hates orange. And I'm 2 for 2. I made an orange sweetbread once, and I made lemon bars a handful of times, and it's like her now favorite dessert. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Because again, this just goes to show, like, if you don't like something, is it because you've never been shown or experienced what it could be? You know, if you give the right energy to it, if you have proper ingredients. And that's the thing, right? It can get expensive if you're making some pretty complicated stuff. But there's also really cheap ways to do it, right? Because you're also paying for the experience. So if I go to a bakery and buy a lemon bar, which I have done before, just out of curiosity, and then this reminds me how much better these are. Um, it's immediate, right? There's no process. I think that's honestly it's a reflection of society as a whole. It's like everything is very convenient, very quick. You're not experiencing everything about that. So to get all these ingredients, went to the grocery store, picked out the lemons, got the eggs, got the flour, with this in mind. So the creation process for me, once I think of the idea, it starts. I'm already in it in some way, shape, or form. And that is taken away if you just go to a bakery. And then I also realized as I left the culture and the way that I was raised and went out into the world and got older, I'm like, oh, some of it is just no one's ever showed you. You don't know what's possible, right? You don't know until someone opens your mind to some other experience of like, hey, this is what could be if, excuse me, if you just, again, Google certain things. This recipe is by the Pioneer Woman. So that's another part about baking or cooking that I've learned or that I realized. I'm like, there's no need to reinvent the wheel if someone's already done it. And honestly, I could find a bunch of different lemon bar recipes online, and they're all going to be about the same: butter, sugar, flour, lemon juice, lemon zest. You bake it, some eggs, right? And that's where I think the energy of that person is what makes it special, to be honest. I look at someone, the Pioneer Woman is one of the people that I've gotten a lot of recipes from. I remember watching her growing up on the Food Channel, and it was really fun because I'm like, every person that I would watch, they would all be making very similar things, yet how it came out was a reflection of how they were when they were baking or cooking said thing, which I think is pretty cool. Because again, it then shows you that energy that I talked about at the beginning, your intention behind it, literally comes through into the finished product. Okay, so now we can put these away. So it'd bother me if I left all this out the entire time. All right, lemons. $11. And another fun part about baking that I'll usually do, now it's conscious, but it's a little bit of a clock sometimes, is if there's two components like this, so I did the crust first and then the filling, I'll make sure to the best of my ability without rushing, right? This is where experience and learning how to pace yourself really comes into play of by the time that comes out, this will be done. And not in a rushed way, just in a way where that I don't want that necessarily to cool and sit there too long before it goes right back into the oven. I want the baking to continue as soon as possible. And so that's helpful for your, timing sake. You want to get sidetracked. You want to stay in the experience that you've created for yourself, right? Which is baking in this case. Interesting. These smaller lemons, I bet will have more juice than this bigger one. Curious. Yep, for sure will. Now, one of the things about the crust, even though it won't affect the taste, baking with gluten-free flour will affect the baking process. So I'll actually probably check that before 20 minutes is up because I just remembered that that is gluten-free flour and it will bake differently. So that's something is to consider. How it may need longer, it may need less, depending on what you're baking it with, right? So I think back to making banana bread with gluten-free flour, it takes a bit longer actually to cook and to brown on top. I'm not remembering this moment when I made these gluten-free last time what that was like, but it does change how you bake. So just if you're going to be using normal flour, gluten-free flour, make note in some way, shape, or form if it takes longer or just a lot, right? You can always cook it more. You can't take it back if you've cooked it. That's it. That's what you got. You can't be like, I'm gonna uncook this. So I'd rather put it in 3 times for 2 minutes until I get it right where I want it than to uh, overcook it, because then you're kind of fucked. Cool. Another reason I like to clean up as I go, especially if I'm using that thing that I just washed, any kind of like whisks, the grater that I use for the lemon zest, rinsing it off immediately. You don't really even need soap because it's fruit, and it's just rinsing off the juice or the zest, and it just saves time later down the road in a really fun way. Cool. So this part here, I like to mix the flour aspect first before I add the eggs, just to kind of make sure it's all integrated, and then we'll go for the eggs. Now, when it comes to mixing really any kind of batter, you want to be cognizant of over mixing. Now, since this is not like a bread of any kind, this part that I'm mixing right now, over mixing is not really a thing. And honestly, you almost want to add some air to it because it will help with the setting and how it comes out, to be honest. 6 minutes. I'll leave that there. So I actually didn't even need this spatula based off of the two main things that I made, right? Because this can just, there's nothing that I need to really scrape free from this once the batter comes out. And then obviously the initial crust didn't need that either. All right, let me check this real quick, see what it looks like. So not quite done. And I do notice a difference from when I made this the other day versus how it's looking now, just because of the flour change. It is cooking a bit differently, which is totally fine. But again, reinforcing the need to double check that. Now, since I've made this before, I didn't need to double check, but it is really helpful before you put anything in the oven or before you take it out of the bowl to double check that you put everything that was required in the recipe. I have done that before where I'll forget to add something. It happens rarely. And back to the beginning of this conversation in regards to how present you are, how aware of what you're putting into the thing you're making, how like where your headspace is at. If I miss something, that's usually a signal to me that I'm not being present. I am somewhere else in some way. And it may be super subtle. However, it's enough where I'm not paying attention. I'm not giving whatever I'm doing, which in this case is baking, I'm not giving it my full attention, which sometimes it's not a big issue, right? You can maybe just add it into the pan or into the loaf pan and mix it up. But sometimes it might ruin the whole recipe. If you forget to add baking soda, baking powder, and you're like, why isn't it coming out? Okay, it's like, well, you didn't add it. So again, let's go over the recipe again, which this will be in the description as well. This right here is the sugar, flour, 4 eggs, and the zest and juice of those lemons. And then on top, once I serve it tomorrow before I leave the house, I'll put powdered sugar on top. And I can't remember if I said this in the beginning or not, but I'll say it again. This is a pretty simple combination of, you have a really butter-centered crust, any kind of pastry crust like that, with the salt. You have a very tangy lemon filling, and then that little powdered sugar adds just enough so when you bite into it, the powdered sugar hits the roof of your mouth, so you're not hit with a bunch of tang. Now, even though that's pleasurable, it cuts it just enough where it's not as like, shit, you got hit with a bunch of lemon juice, right? And I made it, the first time I made this for my friends, I didn't have powdered sugar, and they still loved it. And I was like, wait till you try it with powdered sugar. And it does make a big difference. So that's where, again, you don't need the powdered sugar on top. It's not needed. And a little hack when it comes to powdered sugar, if you don't have powdered sugar in a bag, but you have granulated sugar, you can just put granulated sugar into a blender, and that is then powdered sugar. I remember when I learned that, blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute. I still buy powdered sugar because it's a little more convenient than like using my blender for that case. But it is something that, again, you can improvise, right? And if you don't have powdered sugar, not a big deal. I actually just thought of making brown sugar powdered sugar. That could be fun. So at this point, there's a minute left. I'm going to take it out just to look at it, because chances are it's either going to need more than a minute or it's going to be done. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to see. The sides need probably, I'm going to put it in for 3 more minutes and take it out at probably when it has like 50 seconds left is what I'm going to do. Wash this last thing. So again, one of the things that I hear from people a lot when it comes to cooking or baking is they hate cleaning up. And as you can see, we're cleaned up ready, and all I have left is this, which this will be super easy to clean. And so that's where if you want to cook or you want to bake, which I believe most people do, because it's a fun process. Again, if you're gonna have a family someday, honestly, just cooking for yourself is way more enjoyable. Not opposed to DoorDash, not opposed to ordering food. I love it. But again, the experience you're missing. And so if you can find ways, the parts that are not as enjoyable, you need the polarity there, right? So you have the enjoyment of baking, the eating of it tomorrow, right? Or in 4 hours if you want to stay up late. But then streamline the cleanup part. Don't make that be like super strenuous. Find a way to incorporate it into the flow of you baking or you cooking. Or if you're cooking with someone else and they don't mind cleaning up, you can tag team it, right? It's like, hey, I'll do the cooking part, or we can kind of bounce back and forth. Because that way you're not, again, what you put into it energetically comes through. It really, really does. And there's so many other reasons why. So like right now, there's zero stress for me of what I'm currently doing because this is not stressful at all. And again, I've been doing this for a while, but it's still pretty interesting to notice because there's sometimes where I don't do what you just saw, right? It could be because I also made dinner or I was meal prepping at the same time and I have a bunch of dishes to clean up. It's not stressful for me, but I do notice a difference in my system of how enjoyable or how seamless the process is when I do it how I just showed you, which in my opinion is ideal. And you kind of prep beforehand so that can happen, right? Cool. So I stopped that at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And it still needs a touch more time. I'll also touch it if I need to, which I just did. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I found between 1 to 3 minutes, if you're trying to fine tune a crust or anything you're baking, is enough time where you probably won't overcook it. Rarely have I done that. It's usually if I get up to like 5 minutes where I'm like, that's probably too long. So again, I'll do what I'm doing, right? I'll check it every 2 minutes, come back to it. If it needs more time, I'll do it again. So one of the things, which we'll probably actually have time for this in this video, when it comes to these baking videos, and it'll be different for everyone, right? When it comes to what I'm making, how long it takes, how much it takes to explain these are pretty simple. There's gonna be some other questions and other things that I might want to talk about or think about with you guys. And like I referenced in the intro video to my channel, some of these topics that we're going to talk about will be not necessarily factual or this is the only thought of it. Part of it is just to spark interest or to bring awareness and to start a conversation on a bigger scale of like, okay, this is happening on an individual level, on a collective level. What is my role in some of this? And excuse me, I think it's very, very beneficial because I really do believe that ideas change the world. Meaning, yes, we have laws, we have other things that need to be incorporated, but those laws or those policies or whatever is going to be coming through change with ideas. They literally do. And then someone then incorporates that idea and turns it into a law, turns it into a policy, shows up in your relationships, in your partnerships, in your families, right? Like this, what you just saw was an idea at one point, and then the action behind it showed up into this. So again, that will be probably once I put this other part in the oven, there might be some other things we can talk about. Trying to think anything I'm missing in regards to the lemon bar situation. I don't think so. When it comes to this filling, I will say, similar to any kind of egg mixture, you want to make sure it's nice and mixed in properly. If you don't, there might be pockets of the set where it's more egg centered, and that's not going to taste or look super, super great. Cool. So that's only 2.5 minutes. All right. So this, can't really see it, but it is a little bit brown on the side. So that's our cue to pour this in. And actually, I am going to use this spatula just to get the... So I'll mix this up. It will kind of settle. The sugar will settle at the bottom. So right before you pour it in, give it a little stir. Don't burn your hand. And honestly, that may have been too soon for part of it. I just saw some of the batter move. So we'll see. This is where you learn, right? And again, it's not going to be bad by any stretch of the imagination, but that's just where you might tweak it a bit. Cool. And again, that is 20 minutes. Let's double check actually before I say that. Yep, about 20 minutes. So put it in for 20 minutes, then I'll check it, and then we'll go from there. Whisks are probably the most inconvenient to clean if you don't do it right away, or at least get it in water right away. And that's lemon bars, y'all. Pretty simple, honestly. When it comes to the baking world, you don't really get much simpler than that. Again, let me see how long it says technically. Fridge for 2 hours. So I could have put this in the fridge when this comes out in 25 minutes. And in 2 hours, they'll probably be cold enough. Just from force of habit, and usually when I end up baking them, I'm not going to want to eat a lemon bar at midnight. And the next morning, cold with milk is the best way to go. So, for the rest of our time, we're going to talk about, so in the context of, again, baking, homes, relationships, those things are very intertwined from my experience when it comes to this part of your life, whether that be with a wife, husband, your kids, friends. And one of the things that I have really been fascinated about, I grew up with 6 siblings. I'm one of 7, 4 sisters, 2 brothers, and seeing the massive difference in how men and women communicate. I know it's not a new idea. As I've gotten older, I've been able to find some other people's work, amazing different teachers, coaches, mentors that have done a lot of legwork in the battle of the sexes, for lack of a better term. And it's interesting because through my experience of, again, growing up the way that I was raised, being shown a certain way, seeing what society has done to the difference of men and women and how we're supposed to operate in the world, it's just really interesting to me because I feel as though we're like missing each other and just barely. Like we both, I think, want the same thing. It's just we are different creatures, truly. And so I've had some friends of mine over the last 4 to 6 months, and I've intentionally asked this from women and men when it comes to some like interesting things that I think there's a misconception on. And I'll give one reference for resources. Allison Armstrong is an incredible resource when it comes to this kind of conversation. And what I mean by that is the conversation of the way men work and the way that women work. And the more that I've talked to women about this and shared the honest reflection from a man who has had a lot of experience in regards to communicating with women, again, just from a childhood point of view, and then in my adult life, I've given them some pretty interesting insights. And so I want to touch on some of those, and just again, coming from the lens of not saying this is factual. Some of it is factual on like a biological level of how men work and how we operate in the world and what we want and what we need for partnership and vice versa. Like one of the things that I hear a lot of women say in my life now with people that I work with is they can get into a relationship with a man, but they can't keep him. They don't know how to keep him. And I was talking the other day with someone about this, and I explained to her, I was like, when men are in high school, when we're growing up, and we want to approach a woman, we want to ask a girl on a date, we have to learn how to communicate with y'all. We need to try and figure out how y'all work. And you guys are pretty complicated creatures. Yet also you're not. The same for men. Whereas for women, ideally, you guys are on the receiving end. And this is where the ball is being dropped from our parents' generation, I believe, and the lack of eldership that men and women both have not received in regards to no one teaches women how to communicate with men, how we work. We have to figure it out by default if we want to initiate a partnership or a date or whatever it may be. And again, there's some nuance to this, right? So I encourage you, as you listen to some of these things, or even as what we've talked about so far, don't jump to justifying your own belief. Because if you do, you're going to stay in that belief probably forever. So again, as you watch these videos and as we talk about some of these things in this one and going forward, be open to a different point of view. So I'll touch on this. The idea of thinking, to properly think about something is a skill, and I believe it's being lost. So if I want to think about something that I currently believe, right, I'll put it in this hand right here. This is my current belief. And I'll use something that I've heard before from women is all men are slobs or lazy or creeps, right? That's right here. Now, the alternative is maybe a new perspective. And what you need to do, you hold those two and then put yourself in between those two and be like, let's weigh these. Let's see how real this actually is. How much of this is just a reaction to the way I was raised or shown up by my dad, by my mom, by the people in my life, right? And then is that actually coming through a clear lens, or is that being filtered through unresolved heavy emotions, right? Anger, fear. I know there's a lot of fear that women have towards men, and for right reason in a lot of ways, and a lot of distrust that men have towards women, which is also for good reason, right? We have different shadows on either side. And so I'd offer you, when we think about some of these concepts, view it like that. View to think and be okay with those two going to battle. It's a very strange feeling in your mind to think accurately, to be like, wow, both of them could maybe be right. Both of them could maybe be wrong. And realize there might be a third option somewhere, right? And as you start to pull apart those ideas, a third option might present itself. And that's really fun, because chances are, if what you have always believed isn't working, why would you hold on to it so tightly? Like, be okay with that being different. So think about it through that lens as we kind of talk about some of these. So here's one thing that I'll touch on. So the difference in how men and women communicate. This is a big one, because this, I think, is one of the foundational issues that it stems from so many aspects of life for men and women in that dynamic. Women, and there's biological, historical reasons for both of these things, which we might get into, but just realize, like, these two concepts I'm about to present is not like a preference or unique to certain people. Like, on a brain chemistry level, this is how women are wired, this is how men are wired. And realize there's the masculine and the feminine within each of us, but our brains, as like, I'm a man, so my brain works the way a man's brain works. Full stop. Same thing goes for women. So a woman, your all's brains, I'll use the language, diffuse focus. So people have thought about that as like a big bowl of spaghetti. Everything is intertwined, everything is connected. You guys take in everything all at once. That's why you guys have a hard time relaxing if any part of the house is cluttered. If any part of it is not your version of tidied up or clean, you can't sit down and watch a movie. You can't even maybe go to bed. That's why you're doing laundry at midnight, because you're just like, I got to do this before I can do anything else. So that's one part of it for a woman. As a man, we are single focused. We do one thing at a time. And there's reasons for that, right? When it comes to hunting back in the day, we're like, cool, we're going to go hunt for a month. That is all we think about. And so, in that, if you ask a man, I'll use this as an example, if you ask a man a question, and it could be something, and I'll put this in the context of partnership, right? Because it's a little bit different for maybe friendships, right? But in the context of partnership, just use it in this context. If you ask a man, how is your day? What he is doing in that moment is he is going inside his brain. You might even see him close his eyes or kind of like become a little bit pensive, right? He is going inside his brain and he is going through this deep, deep vault, like feeling like going to a deep mountain and gathering any bits of information that are pertaining to the answer to the question you just asked. How was your day? So he's thinking, okay, what did I do today? Who did I see? What might she find interesting? What did I find enjoyable? Or like, what was a high point in my day? If you had a rough day, what parts of that do you want to share, right? And how much he shares will be a direct reflection of how much he trusts that woman, right? So if he has a hard time maybe opening up and trusting her emotionally, he might not share certain parts of his day. So that might take him 10, 15 seconds. Now, as a woman, because you guys are you communicate very differently, a lot of women, again, from my experience, will be like, did he not hear me? Did he not grasp what I said? Is he dumb, right? That's what you guys will jump to. And you'll ask a second question, maybe something that's simpler or a different approach. And then what you've done in that moment is you have then disrupted the process that he was just doing, because we're single focused. We were answering the question you just asked us, right? And then we have to, instead of saying, how was your day? You might ask, did you do anything fun at work today? That's a different question completely. And that probably would have been answered in the first question. And so then he starts that process over again, goes back into the vault with a new question to answer. And then you probably get even more impatient, and then you ask a third question. And then at that point, the man, especially if it's a longer day, he's like, he'll give you some short answer, and then you are then lacking and wanting more connection and more information from him, yet you just communicate with him not how he needs to be communicated. So the antidote to that would be this. You ask a man a question. Hey, how was your day? And then you just shut the fuck up. You don't say anything. And you just sit back. Okay? And you just watch his brain work. And this is why, and there's a shadow side to this. I think I've seen this in culture too, where when people say, oh, women just need to be quiet, that's a negative side, right? I'm not saying women need to be quiet, but if you're trying to get information and listen to a man, you do. Because if you ever see two men communicate, it's very like he'll talk for a while and he'll talk for a while, if it's on a deeper level, right? If we're just like bantering, that's different. But I'm more talking on like a deep emotional level. So you ask that man a question, you just sit back and you don't say anything. You just listen. And eventually he'll start talking. Could be 10, 15 seconds. Once he starts talking, your instinct by nature, because you might hear something like, say he got an iced coffee, and you're like, oh my God, I got an iced coffee too. Now, if you were talking to a girlfriend, you would then see that as a point of emotional connection. You'd be like, I did the same thing you did. So that makes us close. Women find safety in emotional connection. So if you don't make that connection in that moment, you then will feel unsafe. But realize that's not how a man works. So like, if you interrupt a man while he's saying it, that is a very high form of disrespect, because that tells me you're not actually listening. You're just wanting to say something to interject my story or my answer to your question. So this is where self-discipline and patience on the woman's part is very, very important to cultivate, is that urge to jump in and say something. Hold on to it. Doesn't mean that you can't say it after when he asks about how your day, right? But in that moment, if you're wanting true connection and true emotional depth, which I believe a lot of women are wanting, and honestly most men want as well, we just aren't usually given the chance in our romantic partnerships to share said things, which is kind of sad. So as he keeps answering, telling you about his day, whatever it is, if he, asks you maybe a question or something, which probably wouldn't happen, you can obviously speak. I'm not saying you should just sit there and mute and be like, I'm not going to say anything. But it's like, use your intuition. Women are fucking smart. Like, try and channel that part of you in this conversation. Like, let me feel into what he's saying. He's probably, the stories he's telling you is conveying emotion. The way men tell stories, especially if it's a repeated story, there's a reason for that. We are very cognizant of wasted energy. We're not going to say something without a purpose. And so use your spidey senses that women have, which I love so much about y'all. Use that part of you to feel into what he's saying. Like, okay, what does he mean by that? Like, just listen and be present with that and enjoy it. And then he might pause. That pause is not an invitation for you then to start talking. At that pause, count to 30 in your head. Slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Around 15 to 20 seconds. Because in that period of time, what he's doing, he's scanning his brain, he's scanning that vault I mentioned earlier. And he's like, what did I miss? Did I miss anything? Is there anything I want to add? Is there anything that came up as I was talking that I want to share in addition? And chances are, if you don't interrupt him, he's going to find even deeper things to talk about on an emotional level, right? He's got all the surface level, how my day was. And then he might be like, yeah, actually my day was pretty, this happened, I had an argument with my boss or whatever, deal fell through, whatever it may be. And that's, again, from what I've heard from women and what I can gather, that's what women want to hear. And men also want to be able to share that in a safe spot, in a safe space, because emotional connection is one of the ways you build long-term relationships, romantically or platonically. So count. And then he'll probably start talking again. Then the final part to this is there will come a point where he will say some version of the following. That's it. I'm done. That's how my day was. He will end it. He will end the answer. And that goes for any kind of bigger question you ask a man ever, is he will conclude it in some way. It's like a signing of the answer, right? And at that point, if you want to ask questions, if you want to then dialogue, you totally can. But realize he may keep going for a while, right? And again, that's what you guys are wanting. Now, I've noticed this, and I've tested this theory with a lot of people that I work with, where if I'm talking to a man, I'll do what I just described to y'all, right? Because I'm a man. I know how it feels. I'll ask a man a question, and then I'll just let him go on it. I'll let him talk, right? And you can kind of feel if it's like a don't interrupt me kind of conversation, or a, excuse me, we can go back and forth, right? Whereas if I'm talking to a woman, one of my sisters, my mom, friends of mine, I'll interrupt them because I know that actually that's how they, if I have something that I feel like I can relate to them, I more so do it for them, not for me, because I know that's how they feel connected. So, to give you an example, I was seeing a friend the other day, and she had asked me some kind of question, and I knew the essence of what she was asking. She's looking for that emotional, not emotional safety, but like, how was your day? What have you been up to? Like, I haven't seen you in a while type vibe, right? And so being able to oscillate for men and for women between communicating to men and communicating to women is also a skill. It takes time, it takes practice. And I've even told, if I'm talking to a woman, there are certain times if I feel interrupted, I'll call it out of like, hey, in this moment, it's not a big deal because it's not in a very important conversation, but just conveying to them and telling them like, this is how it feels as a man to be interrupted, especially if you're asking, like if you ask me how my day was and then you start doing something, I know conceptually you're still listening, but how it feels on my end is like, well, you're not giving me your full attention. And men and women both love that kind of attention. So yeah, I think that's probably all I got for that. Test this theory when it comes to relationships, right? Ask a man a question and then just shut up. See what happens. See what he says. Don't interrupt. Don't interject. And this is where I think, from what I've seen in my work, is the biggest hurdle, the edge for women in this is to have self-control in those moments of wanting to connect, of wanting to be like, oh my God, me too. Because we're single focused. So if you then interject, you've just thrown us off track. So practice that on a self-control level, because that level of self-control that you can cultivate as a woman will be a direct reflection of how deep your man will be able to go with you emotionally. And so in that, it's kind of up to you guys of how much the man will share. It's like, and also, are you trustworthy? Have you cultivated a level of trust with your partner or even with your friends where you're not going to go then tell all your girlfriends about it? Because here's the thing that women do when it comes to information, right? This is why gossiping and talking is a big thing among women, is you guys view information as currency. And so if you get told something by a man, that's like deep or whatever it is, that's vulnerable for us because that could be used against us in some way. And a lot of men, sadly, have experienced that. Okay, cool. So this is set. You kind of see it, right? It's not really moving. And you can kind of see bubbles throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to let this sit on the counter. Edges are nice and brown. Oh, this looks so good. Lemon bar conclusion. This is what it looks like. And I'll close out this thing, and this will be the end of it. That information that men share is valuable. And so for women to realize your trust, your ability to listen and to then not tattle, honestly, is a big part of why men won't share. Because at some point in their life, which is very unfortunate, that happened to them and they're like, cool. Because as men, the way our brains work is we will immediately remove a threat on a safety, from like a safety point of view. So if I touch this right now, it's burning. This might be a bad example, but like the easiest thing to do is just like remove myself from that situation. That goes emotionally, physically, all of it. So if I share something with a woman and then she uses that against me at some point, that tells my system like, cool, women are now not safe to share these things with me. Or women are now not safe for me to share this part of myself with. And so as a woman, you have an opportunity to rewrite that. It's not a responsibility for you guys. It's like, if you guys want that, that's up to you guys, because we will respond to your level of listening to us and not interrupting and not treating us like a woman on the communication level. And I'll touch more on that at a different point. But yeah, so this will go in the fridge overnight. I'll put powdered sugar on it tomorrow, and then we'll be good to go. Any questions, please leave it in the comments. Happy to elaborate more on this topic. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.